I have done videos on almost all the criteria regarding the EB1 and ranging from lesser known award, judge of the works of others, authorship, original contributions, membership of professional organization. The only one that seemed to be common that I've not done a video on is the published article about me in professional media or major publication. And that is what I want to talk about today. And I want to stick with me as I, help you understand what USCIS is asking of you and how you could make a credible argument. Welcome back to my channel where we break down immigration success strategies for researchers, entrepreneurs, for those applying for EB1 and aiming for the TERPs and EB2. Today, I'm going to be diving deep into criterion 3 for extraordinary ability petitions, whether you are applying for an EB1A, O1 or similar visas. And I think this video is for you. And the criterion 3 is publish material about you in major media or major publications. So what is it exactly about? And I would say that the published material about the person or the beneficiary in professional or major trade publication or major media relating to the person's work in the field for which classification is sought. That is actually the title for which USCIS listed it. In simpler terms, this means that major media coverage about you and your work, not articles you wrote, but articles, features, or news stories about you and your work or about your research or invention in professional media. And I will say you stay tuned to the end of this video as I will show you common pitfalls that people have made regarding this criterion and how you could have overcome these pitfalls. However, before we go on, I want to think that it would be nice to look at USCIS guidebook so that we'll understand exactly what they are requiring from us. And I will also take you through administrative appeals, that is the AAO, so that we'll look into it together to understand why they rejected somebody's application and how we could learn from that mistake that someone else made so that you and I don't make the same mistake. This is from the USCIS handbook, and USCIS says that such evidence must include the title, the date, and the author of the material, and any necessary translation, that if it's not published in English. First, USCIS determines whether the published material was related or is related to the person and the person's specific work in the field for which classification is sought. That you see how USCIS is using this language. Examples of qualifying media may include but are not limited to: one, it could be professional or major print publication, that is newspaper articles, popular and academic journals, right? Articles, books, textbook, or similar publications regarding the person and the person's work. Now you could see two things now: the person and the person's work. It could also be professional or major online publications regarding the person and the person's work, and transcripts of professional or major audio or video coverage of the person and the person's work. Now you can see that they always say person and the person's work. And USCIS is saying that consideration could be given to published material that could be about the person, relating to the person's work in the field, and not just about the person's employer and the person's work, or about another organization and that organization's work. And they also say that marketing materials created for the purpose of selling the person's product or promoting the person's services are not generally considered to be published material about the person and about the person's work, as this may not count as objective content material about the person in major print publication that the person or the employer could have actually paid for. However, the person and the person's work need not to be the only subject of the material. but it could also be published material that covers a broader topic but includes a substantial discussion of the person's work in the field and mentions the person in connection to the work for which they have done. And it could be maybe considering material about the person related to the person's work. Now, I've used the word person, that is becoming a cliche. Moreover, USCIS may consider material that focuses solely or primarily on the work or research being undertaken by a team of which the person is a member, provided that the material mentions the person in connection with the work or other evidence in the record, documents, or other records the person's significant role in the work or research. That evidence may include documentation such as print or online newspaper or magazine articles, popular academic journal articles. It could also be books, textbooks, or similar publication, or a transcript or professional or major audio or video coverage of the person and the person's work. Now, secondly, USCIS determines whether the publication qualifies as a professional publication, whether it's a major trade publication or a major media publication. In evaluating this, in evaluating whether the submitted publication is a professional publication or major trade publication or major media, relevant factors include the intended audience, that is, the audience for which the professional and major trade publication, and the relative circulation, readership, or viewership for major trade publication and other major media. And if you look at the USCIS language, they are saying that USCIS may look at objective recognition from respected media sources, like third parties recognizing your contributions, not just you promoting yourself. And here is the key part. The article must mention your name. It must clearly link you to your work, right? It must be published in a major trade journal, that is a professional journal or a mainstream media outlet. And keep in mind that you need to show the title, that when you're submitting this thing to USCIS, the title, date, and author of the publication, and a translation if it's not actually published in English language. Now, when we look at USCIS handbook, you notice that they kept on saying that it has to be about the person and about the person's work. They kept using that word because people tend to publish things, and I've seen a lot of things out there that people find some people, or they get things published, or it is written about them, but it's not about the person's work. It's sometimes it's like an interview that they have conducted. USCIS was clear in their language saying that it must be about you and about your work, and it must have an author. That means that an author in a professional media must have written this article about you and about your work that relates to the classification of extraordinary ability for which you are seeking. Now, I want to make that clear before I continue, discussing what I have in hand. To qualify, the published content must focus on you and your work, not just mention you in passing or focus on your employer or project. This is what USCIS is saying. That and examples that can satisfy this criterion include a feature article about your big breakthrough discovery in a respected scientific journal. Now, that could be an example. And it could also be that a university press release that picked up a research that you have done, showcasing your award or an innovation. It could also be a news story covering your keynote speech at a major conference, right? These are things that a newspaper could carry. Now, before we go out for mistakes that people have made and something we could watch on, I want us to look at USCIS administrative appeals, look at how they have responded to people who appeal their cases, so that we could actually recognize what are the things to avoid and what are the things to give to USCIS if I'm going to be making this argument about published material about me and about my work in major media publications. I'm looking at my iPad here. I'm looking at an administrative appeal from 2019. And on this appeal, I want us to read through what USCIS said about this thing, and you would understand that the petitioner, a filmmaker, seeks classification as an individual of extraordinary ability. Now, this is a filmmaker, so it's likely going to be something that relates to filmmaking and an article about that. I personally chose this particular AAO appeal because it has something that has to do with major media publication from a particular country. And this country has an history of using certain newspapers, and they are worried if their particular newspaper has credibility. Now, I'll go on now. On appeal, the petitioner states that he meets these criteria based on published articles that have appeared in the print and online editions of the Daily Times Nigeria, 2 articles, and Saturday Telegraph, and in the print edition of Leadership. In other words, in order to fulfill this criteria, the petitioner must demonstrate published material about him in professional major publication or other major media, as well as the title, date, and author of the material. The submitted articles are about the petitioner and his work, and they include the title, date, and author of the material. However, the director found that the petitioner had not established that the articles appeared in professional media or major trade publication or other major media. Since the listed publications are daily newspapers and not professional or trade publication, the petitioner must demonstrate that they are considered major media in Nigeria. And if you follow USCIS language, they are not disputing the fact that the newspapers that publish this petitioner's work is considerable. What they are arguing is that you must be able to show us that it is a major newspaper in the country that you come from. Now, you should understand that the Daily Times or Telegraph are not reputable newspapers like New York Times or something like Washington Post. These are local newspapers in a country that they might not have heard about, or that don't have reputation that rises up to the level of New York Times or Washington Post or similar media like that. Now, let's read on and so that we'll continue to understand what is going on here. With regards to the Daily Times Nigeria, the petitioner provided a letter from the newspaper's who states that the newspaper has a daily circulation of 65,000 and is ranked amongst the top 10 news sources in Nigeria, with a broader reach provided by the online website. He also provided a screenshot of Google search results for the phrase top 10 newspapers in Nigeria, which return an outrank list of 16 publications. Finally, the record contains 2 top 10 lists: the top 10 newspapers, Nigerian newspaper most read online from AnswersAfrica.com, and top 10, your guide to the most readable newspapers in Nigeria, published by Legit Nigeria. The Daily Times does not appear on the list either. Similarly, the petitioner provided a letter from of the New Telegraph newspaper, which states that the newspaper prints 65,000 copies daily, has 3,000 subscribers, and is well circulated. He further notes that the newspaper's website has 3.4 million views or hits daily. Like the Daily Times Nigeria, News Telegraph does not appear on either of the submitted top 10 lists, although it appeared in the submitted Google search results. Finally, the record includes a letter from for Leadership Group Limited. Described the Leadership newspaper as a widely circulated nationwide with a daily print run of 55,000 copies, and states that it was awarded Newspaper of the Year in 2009. The petitioner also provided a screenshot from Twitter showing that Leadership newspaper's account has 562 100,000 followers. The evidence shows that leadership appears as number 10 on the top 10 Nigerian newspapers most read online, but the petitioner did not provide evidence that the published article about him, an interview titled Dash, appeared in the online version of the paper. Now, if you notice the argument that USCIS is raising, you would understand that they seem to be accepting interview because it could be regarded that it's about you and about your work, but they are also saying that you should be able to give them enough documentation to demonstrate that the newspaper that published about you and about your work is a major newspaper in Nigeria. And I think that they are looking for comparison. They are looking for circulation data, that if you say that your newspaper has like, let's say, 10,000 copies in a day, that you should be able to compare with other newspapers in Nigeria to prove the fact that the newspaper that published about you has more circulation daily in comparison to the other newspapers with which you are making the comparison. Now, you should be able to demonstrate that your newspaper, for example, has won several credible awards that makes them a major newspaper in the country. Now, I don't know much about New York Times and maybe a Washington Post or the kind of awards they have won. Now, let's say that New York Times won the best newspaper in Nigeria. Let's say, for example, that New York Times won the best newspaper in the United States, and according to SimilarWeb or Simago media ranking, it is ranked at the top 5 newspaper around the world or within the United States. It is enough comparison to show that New York Times is a credible newspaper. And you also look at the authority score to present to USCIS, and you compare the newspaper for which they publish about you, their authority score, with that of other major newspapers, to make the argument that the newspaper that published about you and about your work is a major newspaper based on the evidence that you are giving to USCIS. You should not just give them the newspaper, you should give them, like I mentioned, the author, the publication date, and a link if it appeared online, so that they could Google it and verify that it was really published online. Now, let's move on to the other side of the video that I'm trying to set, because I want to really give you tips of how you could make your case, proficiently, so that USCIS could approve this criteria, so that you don't get stuck, with RF fees and what have you. One thing I hear from most people, especially Nigerians, is that they say a particular media does not do the job, that USCIS no longer accept this particular newspaper. And I think that if I want to address that issue with that particular media publication, or several of them, as the case might be, is that these newspapers have been used regularly by many people who are seeking the same thing. And USCIS is wondering, how is ABC or Mr. XYZ getting, publication about him and about their work in this newspaper? And when it becomes common, it becomes suspicious that they do not respect the credibility of those newspapers. And when you look at the type of things that people are published, you might come to the understanding that these newspapers, anybody that has the money can be able to pay them to publish about them and about their work. And what am I trying to say? The argument I'm trying to make here is that the publication that I see in these newspapers, they don't look credible. They don't read as something that a professional writes. Now, if I may advise you, I would tell you that if you want to publish an article about you and about your work, make sure that it is well written and it highlights who you are and highlights the impact of your work that you are doing, that relates to the classification of the kind of extraordinary ability that you are seeking, not that you write something, let's say, how Mr. A did this, and I don't see any significance. Now, the question I'll put it this way, right? What is the basis for publishing this thing? It doesn't make sense. Do you think that if you were to be a journalist, will you publish this kind of material about you and about your work? And I want to ask you a question. Have you experienced similar issue regarding media from Nigeria or from India? And if so, I want to leave me comments in the comment section below so that we will learn from you and know the hurdles you pass through in solving this issue. Now, let's try to decode what could be considered a major media or professional trade publications. And so the article that is about you and about your work, where was it published? These are questions you should ask yourself, because USCIS carefully evaluates whether the publication qualifies as major professional or major trade media. Now, if you don't have a name, if there is no author of the publication, it's not going to make sense. Now, you also want to ask yourself about circulation and reach, that how many people does the publication reach? If it's print and circulation, website visitors, viewership, is this number significant compared to other publications in its category or field? Another question I think you should ask yourself, who are the target audience? Who is the intended audience, or is it a professional publication that is within a specific field? Does it have international readership? Is it being read globally? And we also look at the geographical scope. Does the publication have significant national or international distribution? Now, is it a small or local newspaper that generates like international readership? You also want to ask yourself about the reputation and prestige of the newspaper. Is the outlet recognized as authoritative, influential, or a leading voice? Does it have established editorial standards and processes? These are questions that I want you to ask yourself. Now, other things that you should consider is that if it has a mainstream reach or generally well known nationally or internationally. Examples could include newspapers like the New York Times that I've been mentioning before, the Wall Street Journals, the Guardian, the Financial Times. Now, the Guardian, I'm thinking of the Guardian UK or Guardian Nigeria or whatever. Magazines such as Forbes, Times, The Economist, or Wired. Or news media outlets like the CNN, BBC, Bloomberg, Business Insider, TechCrunch, which is also often considered as a major media in the tech or business context, or Huffington Post. You should also consider broadcast, which is a major international TV network like CNN, BBC, or radio programs with significant audience. And you be sure to give USCIS transcript and viewership, listenership data. USCIS will be looking for those kind of data to be able to make an informed decision of how many people are listening to this particular radio or podcast or what have you. One question I think we should ask yourself is that what generally doesn't qualify? Now, I would go ahead and list multiple things like local newspapers, community website, newsletters. Now, these are things that doesn't qualify. Internal company or university publications, personal blog, self-published platforms like Medium, unless the context proves otherwise, or website lacking clear editorial oversight. Now, you could also be student-run publications, website known primarily for distributing press releases or offering paid article placement. Now, these are things that I think that doesn't qualify. It could also be conference proceedings unless they are formally published in recognized professional journals or demonstrated rigorous peer review and significant reach. Now, it is crucial to understand that why USCIS requests objective data like circulation numbers. The final determination of whether a publication is major or professional involves some adjudicative judgments like significant distribution, considerable reputations, or extensive reach. Now, because these are inherently relative. Now, this means that you, the petitioner, bear the burden of proof to provide USCIS this document, and you must convincingly demonstrate the publication stature, using objective data and providing context. Now, simply naming the publication, even a well-known one, might not be enough without supporting evidence of its reach and reputation relative to its field or broader media landscape and make comparison with other media. USCIS is not obligated to accept a publication's own promotional claims at face value, and I want you to keep that in mind. The absolute necessity of providing objective evidence proving the publication's significance cannot be overstated. This is a frequent reason for RFEs and deniers because USCIS officers handle cases across countless fields and cannot be expert on every journal or media outlet. The responsibility falls squarely on you, the petitioner, to prove that the publication meets the required standard. Proactive and thorough documentation here is essential for a strong petition. Now, you have to keep in mind that providing USCIS with objective documentation about the news media is something that you should give USCIS because you want to get an approval, and USCIS is not going to be chasing you around to ask for more documentation about the petition you have submitted to them. It rests on you to give USCIS the kind of documentation that they are looking for. I hope this video have been able to help you to understand what it means by professional media publication about you and about your work. And if you think that you've gained value for this video, I want you to go ahead, like my video, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and share this video with your family as friends, as they might be looking for ways to get a credible evidence regarding published material about you and about your work. Keep in mind that if you are publishing these things, however you are doing it, that you should be about you and about your work published by someone else, not you writing this media. Now, we'll see you in my next video. Peace.